Hello, everybody. I'm Michael Fights of Friends, of course, and I am so happy and proud to announce the former heavyweight champion of the world and UFC Hall of Famer, Randy the Natural Couture. Thank you so much for being on here, Randy. How you doing, man?
I'm doing good. Busy as a one-legged man in an ass-kicking contest, but it's all good.
You are doing everything. Like, it does not seem humanly possible. You're commentating for PFL now.
Yep.
You have your own clothing line. You
Yeah, that's been.
have training facilities in U.S. and Canada.
Yep.
Correct. I'm sure there's many more things. You got like 7 movies now. you you went to the high school. You started out. You went to a high school about 10 miles from where I'm at, over there in Linwood, Washington.
That's right. I graduated from Linwood High School in 1981.
State champion over there, correct?
That's right. I was first state champion for the high school in any sport, so that was quite an honor for me, certainly, and my friends were pretty ecstatic about that too.
Yeah, it amazes me. I mean, obviously, people that grew up, I grew up during the dawn of the UFC. I graduated in '97, so it came out in '93 when I was like 15. So of course, I was watching, you and Chuck and everybody, and a lot of these newer guys. I mean, it's like obviously they know who you are, but they don't know all the backstory. So I like to tell that backstory, especially as you're coming on ESPN now, and you on ESPN with PFL and UFC. That is so awesome. But I think a lot of your story, looking into it, I like maybe even more part of your story, the comeback of other things in your life, or at least as much as the comebacks of what you did in the cage. And my kids grew up watching you. We were watching the DVDs. We watched the first, this first season. I had it on DVDs, and it was so awesome to me. Thank you for being a good role model, because you were somebody that my kids could watch and be like, hey, that guy, he does it right. He doesn't insult anybody. He doesn't, I mean, you were a legitimate role model, whether you were trying to be or not.
Well, thank you. I just tried to keep it simple. I guess at the end of the day, if you create one of those personas, then it doesn't matter where you go, you're going to have to live up to that and kind of be that thing that you created that put you in the public eye in the first place. I just tried to keep that very simple and just be me. And maybe some of the promoters weren't as excited about that as I was, but it was just, again, try to keep it simple. You are who you are. I got no issues with that, and I didn't want to be anything else. I didn't need to be the bad guy. I didn't need to generate a bunch of animosity to go out and do my job or do what I trained to do. So, and I think most people appreciated that.
Yeah, I think so too. That's one of the things like George St. Pierre that I looked up. He talked about. He said he learned that from Wayne Gretzky. You learned a lot from your first wrestling coach in middle school, though.
That's right. I think Coach K-Spear, at Alderwood Junior High School, taught me a genuine love and passion for the sport above all things, and I think that's where it starts for kids. Fun and fundamentals. If you don't develop that passion for the sport, they're never down the road when it becomes more serious going to make the sacrifices they need to make to be the best at it. And so I'm thankful for having a coach like Coach K-Spear and then Coach McAvoy at Linwood High that kept it fun. Yeah, it was intense and it was hard because it's wrestling. That's what wrestling is. But they always managed to make it fun and keep us interested in it and develop that passion for the sport.
Yeah, I see that, I think, in a lot of wrestlers, because, in this sport, a lot of people have been very generous with their time with me. They always are, and a lot of you guys come out of wrestling. I wrestled. You learned that respect. You were also in the military. You went back and helped the troops, like in Iraq. One of the things that I wanted to get to, though, that I think a lot of younger fans may not notice, You were the first person, as far as I know, to advocate for fighter pay, and thank you for that for so many fighters out there. You really, I felt like you really put yourself out on the line. You relinquished the heavyweight title.
Yeah, you know, it's been a long journey, almost from the day one when it even goes back a little further than that to the old owners, and had some contract rhubarbs with them over money and that sort of thing. But the real fight started when the Fertittas and Dana White bought the company in 2000, in 2001. I was one of the few athletes that stood up at that time, had new management, was educated on what an ancillary right was, and kind of fought them for my ancillary rights in those contracts. They're really crappy contracts for the fighters, and in a lot of ways the fighters are being taken advantage of. But ancillary rights was one of those things that the company wanted to control in perpetuity, and I didn't know what an ancillary right was, but my agent at the time, my manager at the time, educated me on what that meant. I mean, down the line, if I'd have given up those ancillary rights to even write a book or even be in a movie, I would have had to get permission. And that's kind of the model that the WWE uses. A lot of those guys get permission to do a book or be in a movie or do any of those ancillary things that they built some recognition from being on TV. And I get that's a two-way street. But at the same time, we're individuals. We're the ones sweating and bleeding and walking up in that cage. So I think, ancillary rights is just the tip of the iceberg. Now, if you want to name another professional athletic endeavor where the athletes are taking home about 13 to 15% of the pay that comes in from that endeavor, I'd love to hear it, because I don't think there is another one out there like that. And so we have some work to do in MMA. There's a flaw in our sport, and that flaw needs to be corrected, and the fighters need to get a better shape. And a lot of that's not going to happen until we continue to educate fighters, come together. I think a fighters association is what we're putting. The Mixed Martial Arts Fighters Association is something I'm the spokesperson for. It's that group that's gone out and lobbied Congress trying to get the Ali Act amended and all those things that would change our sport, separate the powers, create some transparency with the promoters. Those are things boxers have enjoyed for quite some time now, and there's no reason why mixed martial artists shouldn't enjoy that as well.
Yeah, I agree with you 100%, and I'm continuing to find more things out about UFC contracts as I see different things recently, talk to other fighters, and I'd always looked at contracts, and I'm like, wow, this really doesn't seem fair. You sign a 6-fight contract, but this is only one-sided, because the UFC can cut you, but if you decide you want to go, fight for somebody else, then they can sue you. You can't. And I just recently found out that I guess you have to lose one fight and then they can cut you, and that's kind of what's been happening with these lightweights in the 125-pound division.
Yeah, they definitely have. Problem is the sanctioning body and the promoter are the same guy in MMA. Boxing, the sanctioning body is a separate entity that's controlled and meets particular criteria governed by the athletic commissions. A promoter is somebody who has a stable of fighters who is going to try to promote, get into bouts, and get them ranked and get them into title fights so that he can then, reap some of the benefit from that fighter's success. Unfortunately, in MMA, the same guy holds both those titles. They're creating their own rankings. They're creating their own titles. And if you want to be ranked or get a shot at a title, you're going to have to sign a very exclusive, very limiting contract with that organization. And that's the problem in our sport right now.
Yeah, and I think the only answer, if they want to be, kind of like they are, like the NFL, the NBA, Major League Baseball, like you said, the fighters and the athletes need proper representation. It just, it doesn't make sense to me. But the PFL, I like what they're doing out there. I like that they just gave away 6 contracts for $1 million. How did you get involved with those guys?
I'm friends with Ray Seppo, who's the president of the organization. It used to be World Series of Fighting. They went through a transition, had some new investors come in, had a new format and a new branding that they wanted to do. They tried me out as a commentator during that transition period. It was a good fit, certainly a good fit for me and and I think a good fit for them. I'll be the first one to say I had some questions about that new format. I mean, you're asking those fighters to turn around every 6 weeks basically and fight again, in the quarterfinals and semifinals, to fight twice in one night, which hasn't been really done in quite a while. And I've been pleasantly surprised with how the fighters handled that adversity. They stepped up, not only did a great job, but were very exciting all season to watch. And it's a meritocracy. You don't need a publicity stunt. You need to talk crap. You don't need to do anything but go out and do your job and win fights and score points. And I really like that. It breaks it down to its simplest form and treats it like a real sport.
That's what I enjoyed too. You got to see, as much as I love Jake Shields. He's a good guy. He's a friend of mine, so that was hard. But like to see Ray Cooper III come into his own. Seems like a super classy, nice guy. Sean O'Connell in his last year to win $1 million. And that was absolutely awesome. And just watching all 6 of those guys, like you said, they didn't have to go out and talk crap. They didn't have to go out and create some kind of dangerous incident that I think we're getting into dangerous territories with some of that stuff that's going over on in the UFC. I'm not a big fan.
Yeah, they're rewarding in a lot of ways that bad behavior, and they think that generates heat and interest in the fights and the fighters. And I don't necessarily think that's the case. And I think the PFL is a perfect example of how it could be, and it doesn't have to be about the publicity stunts at press conferences and at crap talking, before fights and all that sort of thing. And I recognize that some fighters are just wired that way. They need to generate that kind of animosity and create that heat between them and their opponent to go out and do their job. Some guys are just that way. It certainly was never my thing, but now they've kind of taken that to a whole new level.
Yeah, it's like you go on Twitter and say a bunch of things, get a couple of big wins, and I mean, easy enough. I mean, who in the world? I love Derek Lewis. I love him. He's a really nice guy. But you go out there and say your balls are hot, and then all of a sudden you're fighting for the heavyweight championship. I mean, after knocking a guy out where you admit that you had no cardio, then you're fighting a month later. That was ludicrous.
Well, again, some guys are just wired that way. I thought Derek's interviews were hilarious. And again, I don't think he was out to generate a bunch of publicity or make it a publicity stunt, but it certainly worked, didn't it? You think you got a title shot after that?
I don't blame any of it on Derek Lewis. I love the guy. I think he's super entertaining, and I think he's super genuine.
Yeah, I agree. I just think that's who he is.
Yeah, I agree. But then, you have a guy like Stipe Miocic who does his job. He's a firefighter. Happens to be my favorite fighter in the UFC right now, so maybe I'm a little biased. Played a little gaming with him. Seems like a nice guy, but I mean that's a role model to me. And
I liked him. I liked his style. I thought that he was literally coming into his peak at that time, and Daniel Cormier did a hell of a job taking care of him the way he did. I thought that was going to be a much tougher fight. But I have to say, obviously, I'm a big fan of Daniels because he went to Oklahoma State. We were both Cowboys, and he's one of those few guys that really implements his wrestling pretty well into his fight game. But I was a Stipe Miocic fan, too. I thought he did a great job. He showed a lot of great technical skills. He showed some fight IQ in some of those fights, and that's always fun to watch.
Yeah, it didn't shock me that Daniel Cormier won that fight. I knew he had a great chance. It definitely shocked me the way he won it. But, I'm happy to see him getting all his accolades, too, because I think about him similarly, like I talked about, you and GSP. He's a stand-up guy. He coaches for a high school wrestling team still. He prides himself on being a good father and being there for his kids. I mean, there's, those are the kinds of things that they should be promoting. And I'm glad that they are promoting DC. To a point. I don't know, but I have a little bit of an idea that they're asking him to, add a few coals to the fire that aren't maybe his idea. Maybe they are. I don't know. But
Yeah,
like
I
you
don't.
said, it's an
I
entertainment
know.
business.
You know, back when I was active, I never really. I think only one time in my entire career did they ask me to say or do anything in one of my fights. They kind of leave it up to the fighters. So I'd be surprised if they're forcing Daniel to say anything that he doesn't really want to say. But who knows?
Okay, yeah, and of course I'm just speculating. I have no idea, but yeah, I do believe him to be, a stand-up guy. You talked as long as you fought. I do want to mention this. You talked just a few years back about fighting again. You're 55. You're in great shape, but you're not fighting again soon, are you?
No, no. I retired in 2011 after the Machida fight. I knew 6 months before that was going to be my last fight. I didn't make a big deal out of it because those things kind of take on a life of their own, and I wanted to focus on the fight. So not very few people, I think maybe 2 or 3 people knew that was going to be my last fight, which was fine. That's how I wanted it. But since walking away, I've not really gotten the itch. I feel like I went out on my own terms. I didn't have a doctor or promoter telling me I shouldn't do it anymore. I have a lot of life left in me, and actively pursuing jobs in the acting realm, having fun doing that. All the businesses are doing well. I'm busy as I've ever been. So, my phone started ringing when Fedor threw his hat back in the ring, and there were some offers that came through about maybe trying to lure me out. But just like you said, I was in my 50s. It just doesn't make a lot of sense for me to go out and get punched in the face again, frankly.
I 100% agree, and I even look at a guy like Tyron Woodley. Unfortunately for him, congratulations to Kamaru Usman. I mean, great match there. Took the title from him, but he doesn't need to get punched in the face anymore. Like you said, he's only 36, but he's rapping, he's doing movies, he's doing TMZ. He's obviously a very talented guy. And as much as I loved, I did judo and jiu-jitsu, I did amateur boxing for a couple of years. Nothing like MMA, nothing close to anything like what you guys did. But yeah, I would look at that and it kind of seems like a no-brainer. It's like, yeah, why would you want to keep wanting to get punched in the face?
Well, Tyron's a great kid, and watched him, been part of his journey for quite some time. And he definitely had some issues on Saturday. Usman did a great job. What a torrential pace he set right from the start, and he really never relented that pace from the opening minute of that fight. And that's tough to deal with, even when you're firing on all cylinders. Obviously, I think Tyron's had some distractions in his life, and those things will settle, and the music career will take off, and maybe he'll, I know he's opening for Wiz Khalifa coming up here soon, which is a huge step up, and I hope that all goes well for him, and maybe he will be in a position where, fighting will start to take a back seat to those other things that he's got going on. But I think it definitely showed on Saturday. I think he looked a little distracted. He wasn't really in the groove like we've seen him on many of his fights. So, it sucks when that happens, but it's part of fighting.
Yeah. Have you ever, when you were in the UFC, did you ever have a night you think that was that bad where you went out there and it just felt like you couldn't pull the trigger?
You there? I think I lost you. You froze up for a second.
Oh, can you hear me?
Yeah, I can hear you.
Okay.
I had one night in specific, and really 2 that were like that for me. One was the second and third Chuck fights. I was going through a nasty divorce, and again, a lot of distractions, a lot of extracurricular things going on. Didn't feel like myself. You can never take anything away from Chuck. I mean, Chuck's an amazing competitor, but that's definitely a guy you want to walk in that cage with a singular focus, with no distractions and nothing else going on. And I walked into that third fight at 205 pounds, and I didn't cut an ounce. I was 2 pounds underweight, didn't cut in. I mean, that was the kind of stress that was going on in my personal life at that time. So that's a real challenge for any fighter, and certainly was a challenge for me, and ultimately led to me taking a step away from the sport for a while, until the Tim Sylvia fight came up about 13 months later, and it was a great opportunity for me to get back in there. The divorce and all the other stuff had kind of settled, and my competitive spirit kind of came rushing back in. So I was excited to get that opportunity.
Yeah, I got to tell you, I was watching part of that today. I was watching a little bit, kind of going back to some of your fights, coming back in the Tim Sylvia fight, and I know sometimes this makes guys feel uncomfortable that people are nervous around, but I usually don't get nervous for these. But I'm watching a clip of your Hall of Fame induction, and I hear Joe Rogan say, "That guy is my hero," and I had to shut it off. It's like, okay, I'm like nervous to talk to this guy at this point now. And then I turned it off, and I had to come back. But it's like, man, what a compliment from a guy that was, so accomplished.
Well, yeah, Joe's a great guy, and obviously I've met him. My very first UFC, he was doing the behind the scenes interviews for the promotion at that time, and this was before Fear Factor or anything back then. I've known him my entire fight career, and he's just a great guy. You got a respected guy that's willing to stand up and verbalize exactly what he believes, and his podcast is doing great things, and I've been a fan of his as well. So it was a very flattering comment from him, and he's given me one or two nicknames over the years.
Yeah, he's a great guy. He was talking to Lennox Lewis. I was actually just listening today, and I was thinking about you. Lennox is a little older than you, but he walked away, I think about 37, and he was talking about, staying active when you retired, staying mentally active. I guess he's playing chess all the time, and you're doing a million things. So like when I said I get on there, you don't look like you're 55.
I'm holding up pretty well, but that transition can be difficult for a lot of people. I feel blessed that I had other things to fall back on. The businesses that I fostered that came out of my time in MMA, the acting gigs certainly have given me something to. It's a competitive industry, and that fires up my competitive instincts. And you want to get those parts, you want to do those things, so you prepare and you do the things you know how to do to put yourself in the best position to land those roles. But that has really smoothed out and helped me in that transition, where I see a lot of pro athletes, soldiers, other people that their identity becomes wrapped up in that singular endeavor, and that's not an easy thing for people to understand. You don't just take off that uniform and walk into civilian life again. It's a difficult thing. So helping those guys that are in transition, whether they're pro athletes or soldiers, is a big thing.
Yeah, and I know you work with a lot of those guys and help a lot of those guys, and you've talked with the guys over in the war, like I talked about earlier, and I think that's great. I do want to talk about, like I talked about, some of our young fans real quick, and I know I am backtracking a little bit, but to go back to you and Chuck in that first season of Ultimate Fighter 1, I do want to get your perspective. How close were those guys to walking? How close was that to not coming to fruition? Because I've heard those guys were about to walk.
Well, I don't know that those guys were about to walk. I think we were all, a little curious about the whole format. Not sure how that whole thing was going to turn out. You can edit video and make anybody look like an asshole, frankly. So, especially in the reality genre, it's a pretty easy thing to do. So we were all, pleasantly surprised to see that thing be a huge success and really a vehicle to take MMA to the next level. It was a huge thing to give the average person sitting around a bird's eye view, a backdoor view of the training, the discipline, the technique, the level of competitor that these fighters were, and that recognize that they weren't criminals. They're not thugs that are out walking around beating people up and doing negative things. This was just their opportunity to be considered a professional athlete in our society, which is a huge thing. So I never really heard any stories about guys, thinking about walking. Again, you want to talk about contracts. That was a pretty lousy contract. You talk about, kind of holding people's feet to the fire. But those guys were a special group. They weren't interested in being famous. They were interested in being great fighters. And the list of guys on that season that went on to become champions, to be competitors at the highest level in the sport for a long time was pretty significant. There's a lot of them. So I thought that was a very special group. And, none of us knew how that was going to turn out. If there would be a season 2, what are they in? Season 22 now? It's gone on for years and years and years, but it was all predicated on how that first season went. And arguably the fight of the decade was the Stephen Bonner, Forrest Griffin final, where they literally jumped from a 1 million view to 6 million views over the course of that single fight. That's pretty remarkable. So, I was happy to be and feel fortunate to have been involved with that season. Chuck and I are in some ways synonymous. We laugh because he gets, "Hey, Randy Couture, I'm the biggest fan." And I get, "Hey, Chuck Liddell, I'm a big fan." I'm like, "Yeah, I'm not thinking you are." But we both get mistaken for each other all the time, and we laugh about it.
Oh, that's hilarious. I tell people all the time though that I don't think there would be a UFC now if it wasn't for that season, and maybe even for the Bonner Griffin fight. That just put it on the map. I know that they were they had burned through some money at the time. Obviously, they're making a lot of money now.
Yeah, well, to go from having bought the company for $2 million in 2001, and then I think I heard estimates of 40 million in the hole when we were going into the first season of The Ultimate Fighter, and they bought that time for $11 million. But my understanding was that was it. If that didn't turn it around, they were going to be out, and who knows what would have happened to the sport at that time. They definitely had the savvy to get it back on cable, to get it approved in every state with every athletic commission, and get the ABC behind them with the unified rules, and continue to grow the sport and change the image of the sport. So you have to give them the credit they're due for that. And I think honestly, WME bought it for $4.2 billion. I think that got a lot of fighters' attention, that number, and how much they made off of that sale. So a bunch of the fighters recognize now that that they're not getting a fair shake. That there's no reason why we shouldn't be bringing in 50+% or more of the take from every single event that goes to these fighters that are putting their butts on the line, and that's not the case. So, I think it's only a matter of time. This correction is going to happen, whether it be through the amendment to the Ali Act. There's another thing out there that's going on that maybe people don't know about, and that's a class action lawsuit with some very high level fighters that are named plaintiffs, and that's a little longer play, but that definitely calls into question some of the business practices that the UFC has been using over the years. And either one or both of those things will change the sport for the better for fighters. So if you don't know about those things, try and educate yourself. If you're a fan of the sport and you love these fighters, then you want to see them get a fair shake. Educate yourself about what's going on in the sport. Check out MMAFA, Mixed Martial Arts Fighters Association. Pull up the particulars on the class action lawsuit that's going on with the UFC right now. All those things will give you an idea of what's going on in the sport and how the sport needs to be corrected.
Yeah, I will definitely look into that. I mean, that's one of the main reasons that I do this YouTube channel, because I love fighters. I grew up, my sensei basically. I don't know what I would have done. I definitely would have graduated from high school if it wasn't for martial arts, and I don't know what I would have done. I've had a decent career other than that, but I've always, it's always upset me when people don't advocate for fighters, when they don't get the pay. I mean, I was a boxing fan, and my dad didn't even watch boxing but for some reason I was drawn to it at like 7, 8 years old. I would watch it with my Uncle Joe. I remember watching Roy Jones and Mike Tyson, and those guys got paid. And the fact that it's taken so long for the UFC, I mean, it is frustrating. But yeah, hopefully with that $4.2 billion deal and people like you educating people, and I do try from my small platform to educate people on that. Fighter safety and fighter pay. That's one of the most important things in my life to me. The reason that I do to this, obviously, you know, in yours. And I think, again, PFL, like you said, is going to be another big thing.
We're excited. The new season's going to start up here in May, and they're adding a women's division and kind of streamlining some things. And I think it's going to be an amazing season again for season 2 of the PFL. And I look forward to working with those guys again and seeing what the rosters look like. I know Ray Seppo's in the heat of trying to set up the rosters for season 2, and what new guys are going to come in and get a shot at $1 million for this second season. I'm excited to see all of that unfold.
Yeah, what about? I mean, I've only seen her a few times, of course, in MMA, but Kayla Harrison, man, that girl is a beast.
Yeah, very, very accomplished. Obviously, martial artist, 2-time gold medalist in Olympic judo, which has never been done by an American. And she's really got a great head on her shoulders. She's a diligent student of the sport. She's trying to figure out how to shore up all the other parts of the mixed martial arts game and how to implement her judo into her skill sets as a mixed martial artist now. And it's been fun to watch. She's a great gal. She's fun to be around and has a great attitude. So look forward to seeing her. I hope we get some great competition for her this season coming up. And there's some girls out there in the 155-pound class that are up to the challenge and want to get in there. So, I think it's going to be interesting.
Well, I don't think there's going to be any shortage of people trying to get into the PFL after they seen those checks get read last year. Because I was surprised there were some people out there thinking, oh, that they're not going to have the money to pay. And I was like, I mean, I don't know Ray Seppo personally like you do, but I've followed him for a long time. And I'm like, I knew he was doing World Series of Fighting and stuff. And like that guy's not going to promise things that he can't do. So, I mean, I was pretty sure, and I was glad to see that celebration and all those fighters. And I'm sure that'll turn a lot of heads. Maybe even a lot of UFC fighters, like you said, that are on some of those, not so favorable contracts.
Yeah, well, we're certainly seeing Bellator reap the benefits of the free agency. People not willing or wanting to put up with kind of the stuff going on in the UFC and some of the personnel in the UFC. So Bellator's doing a great job. They certainly treat their fighters well. My son Ryan fights for Bellator and has for a long time. They're fun shows to go to, and I have a lot of respect for Scott Coker and everything he's done for the sport of MMA and combative sports in general. I mean, a lot of people don't realize that he was responsible for bringing K1 to the U.S. for a long time. He was, a huge kickboxing guy, but he's been a lifelong martial artist himself. So he understands the plight of the fighter, and he's done a much better job of using that old model, letting these fighters go get sponsors. A lot of these guys can make as much money from their sponsorships as they could from those fights in the lower and mid-tier fights. So taking that away from those guys with a Reebok deal in the UFC was a big blow to a lot of fighters, and a lot of guys, just don't want to put up with that stuff anymore, and they're going to other organizations. So, that's just the way it is.
Yeah, I know. I have a friend that I don't think I want to throw his name out there because he just signed with the UFC, but he didn't fight in this country, and he was actually making more off sponsorships. He wanted to get into the UFC, but couldn't get, they couldn't get the contract right. And he was like, man, I'm actually making more money, not even fighting in the United States.
Yeah.
Because he had done an aggressive job of branding himself. He had a lot of support. He was, he's a really good fighter, and now I know he's happy to be in the UFC. So hopefully they're taking care of him.
Yeah. I hope they're taking care of him too. We have a short window as athletes to make the kind of money we're going to make as fighters. So, we as fighters need to recognize that window literally is on the average about 6 years. So you need to take that money, make as much of it as you can in that window, and then be smart with it. Don't put it in depreciating assets, cars and watches and crap like that. Put it in places where when you can no longer walk those 4 steps up in the cage, that money's going to take care of you going down the road. So I think that's important. Again, fighters are very egocentric. We have to be a little bit selfish. It's what makes us good at what we do. It can also be our undoing with that oh, it'll never happen to me attitude. In the long term and the big picture can sometimes be a big problem for us. So recognizing what you have while you have it and finding ways to make it work for you down the road when you're no longer physically able to do it is a big thing.
Yeah, I mean, just like bargaining in any other job, and like you said, it's a lot more important in fighting, I think, because your lifetime of fighting, your career is so short. And I remember being so upset when you were dealing with some things with the UFC, and they started talking about numbers. And they talked about, oh, we don't talk about salaries because we don't want to bring attention to the fighters. And then they start throwing your salaries on TV. And I'm like, oh, wow, somebody's got a double standard here. I was like,
well, to be honest, I'm the one that started that. I had a big issue with them. They weren't being truthful about everything that was going on. And I'm the one that disclosed some of the money situations because they weren't being honest at that time with me and dealing with me. And so I kind of had to call my own press conference, set the record straight. And I was the one that right or wrong, disclosed some of the things that I'd earned and what was going on kind of behind the scenes. And that was, put a little pressure on them, but also to kind of show what's going on in our sport and what some of the issues are in our sport for us as athletes and fighters. So, they followed up and tried to make me out to be some sort of a greedy asshole, frankly, for doing what I was doing. But, that's okay. At the end of the day, I'm here to try and make it better for other fighters. My son's coming to the end of it. It's not really going to affect him probably, but I got 40 other fighters that train in my gym. There are gyms just about in every corner now full of mixed martial artists that all aspire to be champions, to be the best in this sport. And I feel like they should get a fair shake. They should be getting a bigger piece of the pie for what they're doing, for what they're putting on the line, and it's that simple.
Absolutely. And like I said before, everything you did in the cage, I think maybe you're even more of a fighter for what you've done out of the cage and to help fight for fighters' rights and salaries. And I think that's a great thing. And anything you want to talk about with the fans before we go? Anything coming up? Obviously, you've got your clothing line, you got PFL. Any more movies coming out here?
I've got 3 out right now. The Hard Way just hit Netflix this week. It's a kind of an action flick with me and Michael Jai White. We have a fantastic fight scene at the end of the movie that was a lot of fun. I've got one called The Row that's out on demand, and I've got one called Antidote that's out on Amazon Prime right now. I start The Row 2, the sequel to The Row, next month. We'll be shooting down in Miami for that, and I've got a film called The Manson Brothers Zombie Apocalypse, which is kind of a horror comedy that I'm excited about. One of my buddies, Max Martini, is getting his feet wet directing, and him and I are both going to play parts in this movie. It's going to be a lot of fun. I'm not sure where that one will turn up, but we're getting ready to start that one here in the next month or two as well. There's a lot of rumors. Expendables 4 is going to happen sometime this summer. It's been greenlit. We're waiting on a script, and once the script hits, we'll find out if Toll Road's going to die or not. But
I love those movies. I love all those Expendables movies.
Yeah, they're a blast. Look forward to being back on set with all those guys and seeing those guys again. The charity stuff is going very, very well. We've got a big wrestling tournament and shoot event coming up in Kansas City here on the 16th and 17th of March. So if you're in the Kansas City area, come check us out. Come watch some of the best wrestlers in the border states of Missouri and Missouri get after it, and some of our Olympic athletes for the AWL, the American Wrestling League, which is kicking off in professional freestyle wrestling with some of our best athletes. They're supporting the Extreme Couture GI Foundation in that event, and you'll see Jaden Cox and some of the other gold medalists from this last year's World Championship competing against each other at that event. The shoot's going to be fun. I'll throw the gauntlet down there. Some prizes there. If you come beat me in the shooting events on Saturday, there'll be some prizes there for you, but you're going to have your work cut out for you. I practice a lot. Emerging Vets and Players is doing very, very well. That's our veteran program where we try to bring together retired ball players and retired soldiers and help them through their transitions through training at our gyms and then just camaraderie. And from the LA branch to the Vegas branch, we've now expanded to Chicago, New York, and Atlanta. So we're coast to coast and continuing to vet gyms and find places to get these veterans and these athletes connected that have retired and walked away from those uniforms. So that's something that's very important to me that I'm very passionate about because I wore both those uniforms. So I understand that plight, and we need to do something to turn around the 22 we lose a day to PTSD and suicide. This program has been helping that tremendously. So excited to be involved.
Wow, very, very, very cool. Thank you for all that you do for that stuff. I did have one more question that brought up. If people out there are looking to donate to a good charity, some kind of good cause, veterans or MMA stuff, where would you send them to? XCGIF.org. That's Extreme Couture GI Foundation.org. That foundation is solely dedicated to helping relieve some of the financial pressure for some of these guys that have been wounded and are in transition. Merging Vets and Players, it's vetsandplayers.org. Again, for a major city program, it costs about $250,000 a year to run that properly. So we're constantly trying to get donors and fundraise for that to create these outlets for our vets to get back together, for these players to get back together, talk about what they're struggling with, work out, because most of them will be the first ones to tell you, man, you should have seen me when I was in uniform. I was ripped. And so getting them training again is a big thing, but also getting them sharing, getting them, that camaraderie is a huge part. Most of them miss the locker room or miss, being with their unit. And so bringing that back to them, giving them that new unit, that new locker room to hang out in has been a big thing and very powerful. That is awesome. Do you know, are you registered with YouTube's streaming charity program so people can do streams where donations go straight to your foundation?
No, I haven't seen that on YouTube. I haven't recognized that yet, but I'll have to check that out.
Okay, because I'd like to do a charity stream for your donation. I know other people would like to be involved in it. So I'll try to see what information I can get and send to you. I'll get to you afterwards. I'll definitely put those links down below. Everybody check those out. I think that's the most important battle out there. And thank you so much for taking this time out of your day. It's been a pleasure.
Thanks for having me on. I appreciate it.
All right, everybody. Randy the Natural Couture.